In this particular part of the lesson, the lesson focus was on subtracting fractions that also contained a whole number. The object was to have them understand that they need to borrow from this whole number and add the equivalent fraction over to the needing fraction. First of all, we are able to see what the book talks about and explains by using diagrams and manipulatives. We can see that the students all have some sort of diagram or drawing right next to the problem to help them with the fraction. So there's some circles here for student A. Student B has some squares or cubes right alongside the problem here. And student C has some squares as well. So other than the diagrams that we are able to see on all three papers, we're also able to see that the students all knew that they couldn't subtract the fraction and needed to borrow. So you can see where they all put a line through the whole number indicating this. So there's like the line across the 8 and the 5 and the 4. And student B has the lines as well right there. And student C, you can see the line just right through the 8, the 5, and the 4. And with this, the book does talk about and state that drilling should be done when the student already knows the material. But these students, I don't think they understand the concept of it. I believe that the students were drilled the procedure of borrowing from the whole number, but they don't understand and grab the concept of it. They just do it because the teacher told them to. So, for example, student A was able to get 14 right. Well, the student missed the reducing the fraction, but it's the same concept. But I feel like the teacher, like I said, the teacher was there helping the student out, so I believe they worked on this together. But for 15, you can see that the student just borrowed from the whole number, even though he didn't need to, as the student goes on and subtracts the original 2 minus 1, which is 1 right here, and then subtracts the 1 from the 5, even though it shows the student tried to borrow. So you can see there's like 4 up there, but the student just ignores it and just subtracts the original number. On 16, you can also tell that the student doesn't know what borrowing is. The student does the procedure and borrows from the whole number, but adds 7 to the numerator to create 9 over 9. Instead of adding the equivalent 9 over 9 to the needing fraction, so that the fraction would be 11 over 9. Student B as well does a procedure of borrowing but adds the wrong amount. It seems to me like the student added 4 to the 5 and drew the answer to be 1 over 9. Question 15 is another example of a student knowing that there needs to be borrowing but doesn't understand and grasp the concept. Here the student borrows from the 5. So the student borrows from the 5 and adds 3. I believe. Yes, adds 3 to the numerator of 2 in the fraction, therefore creating 5 over 3, which then the student uses that 5 over 3 and then subtracts 1/3 from it to create 4 over 3, which is completely wrong. And then the student, I guess, decided to skip 16 for some reason. Gives a question mark. Student C is the strongest out of the 3 in that the student does understand the concept of borrowing a little more than the others. Question 14, the teacher was, I could see that the teacher was right there next to the student, helping the student out. So I believe 14 was the teacher, but you can also tell that the student messes up on the whole number subtraction right here. Instead of, how the student borrowed from the 8, it should have been a 7, but he overlooks that and just subtracts 8 minus 2. But for the next one, we can see that the student did the same thing as student A on that same problem. So right here, the student borrowed from the whole number, even though he didn't add any number to the fraction. Right over here, the student does bounce back on 16 and does add the equivalent fraction to the fraction needing. So right over here, the student does borrow and add the 9 over 9, the equivalent fraction, and adds it to the 2, which creates 11 over 9, which he then goes on to take away 5 from 11, which ends up as the answer being 6 over 9. But with that being said, the student forgot that they borrowed from the 4, and it should have been 3 minus 2 instead of 4 minus 2. And the student also forgot to reduce the fraction. So looking over the work of these three students, with these students I feel like they know a procedure, but they don't know what it means and what they need to do with borrowing from a whole number. A plan for helping the students would be to have more manipulatives for them to use and touch physically. Instead of just having them do it right next to the problem, they can actually use some sort of objects or cubes, stuff like that, to help them visualize the fraction and borrowing from a whole number. Another thing that could be done is to give them like a scaffolding of the steps of subtracting fractions when needing to borrow from the whole number. We can all work on that scaffolding paper with the steps, which they can use later on when they are doing independent work or their homework at home. I believe if they have these steps, they can actually see and visualize the problem and what they need to do, because the teacher is just going off the online program and never really models anything. So this combination of both might be the best approach to showing them that there is more than just putting a line on the whole number and it just goes away.